There is no longer distinction between those two. You can speak about how a caterpillar transforms into a butterfly within 4 weeks or so. I can actually change the instructions of my genome and grow wings instantaneously. And with that, I changed not only my appearance, having these flashy, amazing new wings, but I also changed how I interact with everything around me. Have you ever thought what the world would look like if you, and many of you in the audience, would be able to fly? The idea of national borders would disappear. Stairs will have no meaning. Terrestrial traffic, no more. With that, we would expect changes in privacy laws, transnational treaties, real estate transactions, streets, lighting systems, retail industry, transportation, and the list goes on. But what if, as a human, you no longer require oxygen to live? You can go under the water, no more snorkeling, just observing the flora, or roaming around the moon. Better yet, roaming around the Mars, beating Elon Musk to it. You in your primitive version still speak about technological singularity as first coined by Bernard Vinge and then later pushed forward by Ray Kurzweil and others. Many doubt singularity. Many doubt that technology and humans will merge and become one. But look, you already do that. Your memories have been enhanced with your mobile devices. You probably don't know the email addresses of the people that you know intimately. Yet if I were to ask whether you do, whether you have that information, whether it's in you, you will without hesitation say yes. But it is not in your internal memory, rather in an external drive. How long do you think until technology closes that gap and transfers that external drive, which is never convenient to carry around directly into your brain, with additional synaptic connections? In my world, neuroscientists and neuroengineers have married. We have completely figured out how microcircuitry works. My primitive version of today, albeit less handsome, but more sensitive, you're vastly inferior. You're now worried how you're going to justify all these crazy ideas your version 2.0 suggested. No worries, big guy. Just got it out. Armin 2.0. You're insane. But please, ladies and gentlemen, give this wonderful guy a very good round of applause. Let him leave, disappear forever. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. Here we go. First inaugural forum. Thank you very much for your attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Orjan. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome President of Republic of Romania, Dr. Armen Sargsyan.
Some of you went to the West, became Europeans, and then Americans. And some of them went to the East and becoming Russians, Chinese, Indians. We stay here. We are the gatekeepers. Gatekeepers for the humanity. So because it's a gate, because it's a crossroad, I think it's the time that humanity comes back to its sources, to its origin, which is the gate of the human race to Armenia. And I agree that the future of human society is much more complex. Of course, I can dream about Armen's version, not only 2.0, but 3.0. Because the moment he's fully digital, or I can describe him everything of him mathematically in a form of a code, what can I do then? It's very simple. Compress it, make it a small file, and then put in a computer program and spin it off. So it will travel with the speed of light. So someone, somewhere in the universe, in one of the galaxies, will have the same technology. They will receive Armen, they will decode it. So Armen will arrive somewhere in the Andromeda galaxy, representing Armenian nation. So it is a real gateway to the future, in many ways. I like the title of this conference. It speaks about the evolution of engineering. At our today's meeting, we said, I think maybe it could be used also reversely, the engineering of evolution. I'm just back from an international conference in Geneva where we were speaking about the fourth industrial revolution. This was a conference of the World Investment Forum. And to be honest, the way I see it, there are no revolutions. It is just the accelerated evolution. The evolution that was started, probably technological revolution around 300 years ago, that was gradually accelerating. It has become exponentially gradually growing up now. So the period that we're basically finding that something has seriously changed and call it a revolution. Initially it was probably 100 years, then it was 50, now it's 30, and it will become tomorrow 10, maybe afterwards a year. So we will be facing revolutions every 1 or 2 or 3 years. So the humanity, especially the gatekeepers of the 21st century, have to be ready for that. And I really like the whole title of it, the engineering of the evolution. I think we have to be part of the engineering for developing the evolution or development. And it's evolutionary development not only of science and technology, it's evolutionary development of many things. Because as you said in your point, or your colleague, 2.0 view, that a lot of things will change. How we manage things, social behavior, institutions. So it's going to be rapid evolution, not only technology and science, but also our societies and the way we run our behavior in the world. And of course, the evolution of engineering, if we take the engineering as a whole, not just sort of engineering in a classical meaning, but engineering of IT, engineering of artificial intelligence, engineering of our space behavior, engineering of our virtual behavior, and then engineering of biology, the engineering of biological evolution, and also engineering of ourselves. I think we humans were initially, as usually happens with humans, we were more interested in what was happening outside than inside of us. They were interested in how the universe was built, so we discovered the theory of gravitation. We are interested in how the small particles of the material was, so we discovered quantum mechanics and quantum chemistry. We discovered later, we started understanding there is a whole universe inside us. And this universe is as complex as the whole universe. So there's another universe inside us with complexities and beauties of that. So I do believe when we speak about engineering or evolution, we also mean the engineering of ourselves, our health, our behavior, and as we can see, we started living longer and longer. Initially it was 50 years, 70 years, 100 years, more 150, when we learned how to battle not only cancer, heart diseases, but also aging. This will be a completely different society, indefinitely. Then we will need version not only 2.0 but 2.3 to conquer the universe. And my message to you, the gateway is Armenia. So try to invest, and you are welcome to invest in this country, a country that is young, the country that is ambitious, the country and nation that has huge talent, and the country that has a new young government, and some of the representatives are sitting here in this hall, and the country that feels young, feels more in the future, in the 21st century, that feels sort of old as a part of the 20th. And as I can see, a mixture of different faces in different ages, young and mature. Because for me, being young is first of all is a matter of your soul. How young you feel. Are you ready for learning? Are you ready for discovery? Are you ready for asking questions and then answering them? Are you ready for research? Are you ready for the evolutionary acceleration? Are you ready to face your own 2.2? And are you ready to go further than that? To find a way, how do you merge really technologies and the human body and mind, and of course eventually our soul. I think the evolution is infinite, and we don't really understand how complex we are. We have discovered just a small part of ourselves, and I believe that a lot of discoveries, the future discoveries of this world, will be coming back to the gateway. Welcome to the gateway of 21st century. Welcome to Armenia. I wish you successful hard work these days, and I take this opportunity to thank again the founders, the initiators of this wonderful idea, which is called FAST, and congratulate them and wish them all the success. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome FAST co-founder, member of the Board of Trustees, Mr. Ruben Vartalyan.
Good morning, dear guests, Mr. President, senior guests, and member of the government. I'm really glad to see all of you here in Armenia. Like Mr. President said, it's the gate of the future. And I want to say just a few words about three things: who we are, why you are here, and what we're trying to achieve. Because I think it's very important to bring the content of this amazing event that was organized by FAST team on the big picture. I will not go like our man to the 3 billion and half billion years back, but I want to go 20 years backwards only, and I will promise you to be short. In 2001, February, we Boston, two immigrants from Armenian groups met each other, myself and Nubarafia. We both had a different background, coming from different part of the world and meeting together. And we spoke about future of Armenia. And we thought we were talking about very far future. We talked about Armenia 2020. It was 18 years ago, and it was time when we met. It was different situation in the world. A lot of things was absolutely unpredictable. And we said, let's try to create the future of Armenia in our own mind. We've been privileged to meet people who trust us, who follow us, and to together build this scenario of Armenia 2020. I'm the former investment banker who are a scientist and very successful entrepreneur who doing life science investment. We've got people around the different professions trying to think about one thing, what is the future of Armenia? And we realize that the future of Armenia can be built only around one thing, it's a human person. And a human person who can be smart, educated, long-term visionary, happy, looking the world like global citizen, and at the same time being proud of his own identity. We said this is the key element of the future of Armenia, building ecosystem around the human person. During the last 20 years, we did a lot of projects, and we are continuing this journey building this project. You will be, I hope will come again in Armenia. I know you'll be very busy in this 3 days schedule, you will not have time to travel, but I wish you will have a time to come again back and stay to see Armenia, and these are many projects done by our IDEA Foundation, but also our other friends and partners in the zone parallel. We made the projects in education, in healthcare, in tourism, in finance. In all is all about one thing, how we can build ecosystem, the combining holistic approach of the commercial, social impact, and collaborative project together. I was privileged to do this all with the people who have a big vision, and people who have a different background, but have one strong DNA code. We all trust each other. Some of you coming from the Soviet background, you know the free rules that exist in the Soviet system in the criminal law. Don't trust anyone. Don't believe it. This is the free rules of how people live and they believe this is the basis of success. I'm strongly against these all free rules because I trust and we trust each other. This is why, for example, the FAST was established not only by us, but also the I Foundation and Father Messerov and Luis Foundation and Abdullah Laverjan is our chairman. People who come with a different background, we trust each other, we trust, and despite all the differences we trust that we can do something together. And I'm very thankful for this trust that we build around each other, and we build trust with hundreds of people who they participate in LATEF project, in the Industries project, in the project of Aurora, which is Worldwide Mankind Initiatives. And this is all about one thing. We trust each other, that's how we become successful. I also want to thank you to have a privilege to have big dreams. And big dreams comes only when you are believing about your partners and colleagues, but also when you have a vision, but nothing is impossible. Everything you're doing it to be done because you have a vision, you have a values, and you have people around you. This is why I feel very privileged that we can have a vision 20 years ahead. And now we're doing Armenia 2041, realizing that whatever we've been doing in the last 18 years is over. And now we need to look back and say, okay, what we achieved, what needs to be new. And the FAST initiative, which we started only 2 years ago, was part of the core element of what we are doing. We're doing this because we see Armenia is really the hub of the place for the people around the world, different nationalities, to come and feel here, where they can become really more successful, happy, and healthy. And this is the key element, because we're talking about technology, we're talking about the science, but in the end, the human nature is not going to change. 2,000 years ago, or now, we're the same. We want to be happy and have a right life with great people around you. This is why all you have to help us. And I really want to thank you to our advisory board who came from around the world, all the guests who came, and Armenians who live here, who really think that counts what we are doing is very strange. Because building the school with the kids from 84 countries studying now in Armenia, from Japan to Chile, from Zimbabwe to it looks like impossible, but now it's reality in Armenia, seeing this kids as part of the society. Doing humanitarian prize to pay tribute to people who saving lives, other lives in a different part of the world. In Armenia, and all those people who face it, it looks like impossible, but now impossible because all of you, people who come together with us and we're building its own future. So I believe evolution, which we're trying to do, is only in our hand. Just like Peter Drucker, that I really admire, said, if you want to predict the future, build it. I wish we will build bright, happy, and very interconnected future for all of us in the world, and save the planet from being not only very technological developed, but also very happy planet for the humans. Thank you very much and good luck.
Thank you, Mr. Vartanyan. Dear guest, President apologizes, but just he has to fly out of country. Thank you, Mr. President, for being here. Our next speaker is FAST co-founder, Mr. Global. Please welcome.
Well, let me add my words of welcome and appreciation for Armin and the team for organizing such a great, already memorable conference, even though it just started. As Ruben mentioned, we've traveled a long journey together. For the last 18 years, I've come to this country roughly 4 or 5 times a year. And never once did I have an opportunity to talk about what my profession is, as opposed to working on various development projects. And I'm very much looking forward to the next 3 days to talk about engineering and evolution. And I wanted to just offer a couple of opening thoughts to get a little bit more about the actual substance of the conference, just to see if I can provoke you and implore you to take full advantage of this opportunity. I was trained as an engineer. I did a PhD at MIT as a chemical engineer and then a biochemical engineer. And little did I know about evolution. For the last 31 years, I've developed science and technology that is pretty much all about evolution. And I'll give a talk Wednesday morning around this time and tell you a lot more in detail if you're interested about actually what that whole thing is about. But based on that 31 years of work in biotechnology based in Cambridge, I just want to kind of juxtapose engineering and evolution and tell you what a special time this is for humanity. Of course, we can look forward and imagine all sorts of variants of humanity and things that don't even need humanity to persist and exist and live. But what I'd rather do is think about the mindset of engineering and life science and how they're beginning to fuse. I view engineering as largely a goal-based design field, a problem-solving field, a field where theory combines with empirical observation to make advances, and, as we all know, a lot of experimentation and iteration. Evolved systems, scientifically, are not designed and they're not goal-based. And we sometimes forget that because humans always want to attribute goals to whatever we observe. But in reality, that's where a lot of science has gone wrong in this field. To understand evolution, we need to understand everything that came before that were preconditions to what exists today. And of course, there's very little fossil record of everything that happened and exactly what competitive pressure caused what selective advantage and what species combinations, symbiosis to actually develop. And that's what's in front of us. I mean, we talk about biotechnology as though it's a maturing field. It is in its absolute infancy. And one of the things that at least spending all these years in this field has taught me is that continuing to look for theory in the way we understand theory from physics. And again, there are many of you in the room that may be experts, and I'm happy to have an offline discussion, and I'm happy to disagree. But the way theory has influenced other fields, I suspect is not the way it will influence our field. And insisting on a simplifying approach to be able to describe and predict and model things, I think is going to be, I can't say forever, but for at least the foreseeable future, futile. And so what do you do when you don't have either the kind of a system that lends itself to such simplistic description, let's say, or does not allow the human brain to keep all the parts right, to be able to even offer a description of a 5,000 part system that's interacting in 50 different ways at any given state. What humans are absolutely, I would say, outmatched in such a system. See, in my view, evolution doesn't exist to fit into our human minds and therefore be describable. That's a pretty big human conceit that we need to rule everything. First, we need to understand everything, we need to manipulate everything, and then we need to describe everything. I suspect that's not possible. And the reason it's interesting to think about engineering and evolution together is that actually engineering offers some interesting approaches to the study of evolution and evolved living systems. And that comes to data science, which is the other theme of this conference. I do believe, in what we've observed in our own work over the last few years, is that the advances in data science allow us to characterize living systems at a single cell level, at single RNA transcript levels inside single cells, in a way that has been completely unavailable. And then rather than insist that we can write a review paper describing simply what's happening, to use data science, machine learning tools to describe at least the journey that cells can go through upon manipulation and begin to get a framework by which we can at least understand, sometimes predict, and then try to control, particularly in disease states, these systems. And that's a very exciting fusion. I think that without those two approaches, I think data science and life science are absolutely going to be vitally linked for us to make advances in health, in agriculture, in nutrition, in lots of other fields. The last thing I'll just say is just on the actual activity of doing this type of work, which, as all of you know who work in this field, is filled with disappointment, filled with failure. And if you think about evolution, evolution is a cruel, cruel system by which to design whatever succeeds, because everything else dies off in a given competition. And we are using evolutionary approaches today to actually study evolved systems. The Nobel Prize this year for chemistry was given to Francis Arnold, who studied the evolution of enzymes and proteins. And what you see there is that billions of variations produce a slight advance. And it's going to be the same for this field, which is that there will be hundreds and thousands of failed experiments leading to a small incremental advance. And so when you think about innovation, you think of practical application, the question becomes, how do we endure all the failures that will lead to an accidental success, or a infrequent, let's say, it won't be accidental when it happens, but an infrequent success. And so one of the things that meetings like this allow us to do is to exchange ideas, try to see if we can help each other deal with what we're observing, what's not advancing. And the community as a whole, I think, is a very important part of how science gets done, particularly in this field of convergence. So I would encourage those of you who are from outside of Armenia to avail yourself to make new connections to those of you who are practicing these fields in Armenia. These connections, engagement, joint imagination, joint courage of making failed experiments eventually lead to successful ones. That's what we hope comes out of this, and I want to add my welcome to you and encourage you to not miss one moment of engagement during the next few days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rafael. The next person who wants to welcome you is Dr. David Gukasyan, co-president of Armenian Scientific Diaspora Association. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. It is my pleasure and honor to welcome you here in Armenia on behalf of Armenian Scientific Diaspora Association. So the previous speakers set the stage for me to bring the scientific diaspora here. As the Mr. President said, Armenia is a gatekeeper, and as a gatekeeper, Armenia sent its children, and in my case, relatives who is left Armenia at some point and to get their education outside the United States, Europe, and other countries. So now is the time for us to come back to our gates and help Armenia to go into the future, 21st, 22nd, and the other centuries. So on behalf of ASDA, I would like to welcome, and what our mission, ASDA was established, this is the other thing, ASDA was established also 2 years back with FAST, and Global was saying the convergence, okay, so after 2 years, the ASDA, the scientific community that has peak power of mind and the experience expertise, now is converging with FAST just for 2 years. So, and the previous speakers were saying the time that everything is happening is getting shorter and shorter. So there we are. This is one example that in 2 years, the scientific community outside and us here in Armenia are working together. So in our mission of ASDA is to bring our expertise, our network, our abilities into Armenia, because let's say we're Armenians and we are single people in different universities in different countries and in different cities, but we also have our networks. And talking in the language of the biology, if you go into protein-protein interactions or something like that, then you start having a single node, and then that node becomes the part of the network, and then that network goes to a bigger network. So what we would like to do is to bring our networks and all the expertise and extend and bring it over in evolution. And because I'm a little bit more modest than I should be, I invite you to stay in this room and listen to the talk that I will be giving in probably 1 hour, because that will take you towards the human exploration of Moon and Mars. So if we're going back, so in our work, we're going much further, and hopefully I invited, we invited few speakers from NASA. There will be in robotics, there will be in autonomous regulations, and I will be talking about human abilities to go to Mars, Moon, and beyond. So with this, I would like to welcome everyone, and all of you traveled long distance to come here, and that is, it proves that how important this is for all of us and you. And thank you very much for coming, and please enjoy the meeting.
Thank you, Dr. Lukasyan. And it's time to start our visionary talk. And I would like to invite to the stage Dr. Jamie Metzel from USA. Please welcome.
Thank you so much. I think many of us have been at conferences before. Normally, when you hear the introductory remarks, it's the time when you check your messages, you're wondering if you had coffee this morning, you're just really tired. I've never been at a conference where all of the introductory remarks were just mind-blowingly brilliant, entertaining, enjoyable explorations of the future. So with this as a start, it really puts the pressure on every other speaker for the rest of these coming days to really bring it. And for me, I'm absolutely thrilled to be in Armenia for the first time. And although I've not been here, Armenia has been in my mind for many, many, many decades. More than 20 years ago, at an earlier time in my career, I was writing a lot about human rights issues around the world, particularly in Cambodia. And I was speaking at many human rights conferences. And in every one of these conferences, I would encounter basically two kinds of people, among others. One were members of the Jewish community, like myself, and the second was Armenians. And it was really wonderful, and actually it made me feel very connected to Armenia, not because of this common history, but because of the lessons that both the Jewish community and the Armenian community took from the pain of their past. It's not just enough to remember these kind of painful histories. The question for all of us is, what do we do with them? What kind of values do they inspire? And while we're here together at a conference talking about the future, the only difference between a great future that embraces all of these technologies and a dystopian future that embraces the exact same technologies are the values that we bring to the game. And so that's why it's really encouraging for me to be in a place that is known for its promotion of great values, great humanist values, but is also beginning to be known, at the beginning of a journey of being known as a country at the forefront of technological change. And when I started writing science fiction novels more than a decade ago, the main character, the hero of my two most recent sci-fi novels, Genesis Code and Eternal Sonata, was actually an Armenian-American named Dikran Azadian. So I don't know how much Armenian sci-fi has been written, but I hope that I am in the pantheon of Armenian sci-fi writers. And I did come, as Ruben mentioned, I did come 2 days earlier because I really wanted to see more of Armenia. And so I visited a number of your monasteries, including Tatev. Yesterday, I visited the Manuscript Museum, and I just was blown away by the thousands of years of dedication to learning, to not just preserving knowledge, but to growing knowledge. And that is an incredible legacy. And now, at this historic turning point for our species, that legacy of connecting to the knowledge of the past, not just basic sciences, but where we have come from as a species that has struggled with issues of who we are and what is expected of us, that is what we're going to need to bring in this future that is very quickly unfolding. And when I see Armenia as it is today, I see definitely the same kind of image, the same kind of set of conditions as Israel had a number of decades ago, or Singapore. That in this country you have all of the ingredients, as Armin knows, to not just be a passenger of the 21st century, but to really be a leader. You have an incredible foundation in the basic sciences, and I met the head of the National Science Foundation. You have an amazing diaspora of people who are highly educated, who want to help Armenia succeed. And you have a young, motivated population, and I've met a lot of young people over these last few days, including these incredible young volunteers with FAST. So you have all of these ingredients. And there's a big vision of where the country wants to go. Henry David Thoreau, the great American philosopher, once said that if you've built castles in the sky, your work need not be lost. That is where they should be. Now build the foundation under them. And that's why it's such an honor for me to be here with FAST, with Ruben, Nubar, and the others who are really helping this country imagine what's possible. But when we build castles in the sky, we can't just place them anywhere. It actually matters where those castles are built. And that's why in our conversations here today, we really need to imagine not just a general future, but a specific future. And what are the technologies that are going to drive that future? How can this country position itself at the forefront of those technologies to lead that future? And that is the work that I believe that we have over these coming few days and years and decades together. And a number of the beginning speakers have given a historical record. Armin started almost 4 billion years ago, so we can't go longer than that, for life on this planet. But really, we're at a critical turning point because after 3.8 billion years of evolving by the Darwinian principles of random mutation and natural selection, we are turning an evolutionary corner where we are going to be driving our own evolution as a species. And that's a really fundamental, exciting, frightening shift that we're all going to be part of. It's going to touch our lives in very intimate ways. And we all need to be part of this conversation. We all need to be part of this process of figuring out where our species goes. Because everybody knows that we have about Moore's Law. And we've all internalized what that means for our information technology, our cell phones. But one of the foundational principles of the biotech revolution is that our own biology is going to become as readable, writable, and hackable as our information technology. And just as we think about these iPhone 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, now we have Armin 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, we're going to have life and biology and our lives and our children's lives, which are all going to be set on this same trajectory. And it's very hard to get our minds around what that actually means in very practical ways and where we are at this critical turning point for our species. In 1865, the great French novelist Jules Verne wrote a book called From Earth to the Moon, where he imagined space travel. And basically he imagined that there would be a space gun, and they would shoot the gun up to the moon, and this kind of space bullet would smash into the moon. I guess we have the hologram right there for this 19th century French drawing. It would smash into the moon, then people would get out and they would jump off the moon, and they would have parachutes allowing them to land on the Earth. And in 1865, this was futurism. And frankly, he wasn't wrong. It's just that in 1865, imagining travel to the moon was like today imagining sending humans to Pluto. Like, we can imagine it, it's theoretically possible. We just don't have the science. We don't really know how we would do it. It's conceivable. But in 1962, when President John Kennedy stepped to the podium in Houston to give his famous speech, where he announced that the United States was going to send a man to the moon within the decade, that wasn't speculative science fiction. That was a correct analysis of where science had arrived, of what was going to be possible based on the technology, all of which existed, from rockets to life control systems to computers. And so when Neil Armstrong stepped down onto the surface of the moon in 1969, that wasn't crazy sci-fi. That was sci-fi becoming real. And we can all talk about these big abstract concepts, like transforming our evolutionary process as a species, but we have to position ourselves in this history. And my very strong belief is that right now, we are not in 1865. We are not, even though I write science fiction, this isn't a sci-fi moment where we're imagining something that the science can't achieve. We are 1962 in Houston in imagining the transformation of our species. All of the technologies that we will need to fundamentally transform our species already exist. All we need to do is keep advancing even linearly along the trajectory that we are already on, and we will achieve this revolution. But as the president said, we are not advancing on a linear trajectory. We are on an exponential trajectory, where looking back into the past gives no sense of the speed of change going into the future because of this super convergence of technology. And what that means is that this change is coming far faster than most of us understand or are prepared for. Again, using technologies that already exist. So let me just walk you through very quickly what those technologies are. The first is in vitro fertilization. Raise your hand if you've heard of in vitro fertilization. Okay, most everybody. 40 years ago, when the first IVF baby, Louise Brown, was born in the UK, that was a revolution. It shocked the consciousness of the world. Now IVF is extremely normal in many parts of the world, including in Armenia. And there's another process called pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, PGD, or genetic screening, PGS. And that basically is that in the process of IVF, when you have a woman has her eggs extracted, those eggs are then fertilized using male sperm. And prior to introducing those fertilized eggs back into the mother, those eggs, at around 5 days, 5 or so cells are taken from those pre-implanted fertilized eggs and sequenced. And what can we learn from that sequencing? Well, right now, we can screen for about 5,000 single gene mutation diseases, so-called Mendelian diseases. And what those are diseases like sickle cell disease or Tay-Sachs, where there's one faulty gene that if you have will very likely give you that disease. So right now we can screen for those single gene mutation diseases and gender and eye color and hair color and a few very, very basic things. But that is only at the very beginning of what we're going to be able to understand about the early stage embryos. And why? Earlier speakers have spoken about the intersection of the genomics and the AI revolution, and who we are with the massive complexity of who we are as a species. We are ultimately, though, not infinite beings. We are massively complex beings but not infinitely complex beings. And why is that important? It's important because that means that eventually the sophistication and complexity of our tools will be a match for the complexity of our biology. And how will we get to having these kinds of massive data sets where we can match people's genotypes, what their genes say, to their phenotypes, which is how those genes are expressed over the course of their life? Well, the first thing we needed to do was to learn how to sequence the genome, and that came to its realization in 2003 with the culmination of the Human Genome Project. Then we needed to make those technologies affordable, and that's what's happened, going from about $1 billion per human sequenced genome to about $700 today, and we're moving in the direction not just of free genome sequencing, being paid to sequence their genomes, and that's coming relatively quickly. So now we have relatively free or almost free whole genome sequencing. We have big data analytics, and we are moving toward, one, having more and more people who are having their genomes sequenced, and two, having more and more people whose life records, including their health records, are digitized and accessible. So why will we go from hundreds of thousands to millions to hundreds of millions to ultimately billions of people who will have their sequenced genome? And the answer is because we are moving from a system of generalized medicine, which is if you have a headache, you take some kind of headache pill, and then you find out if you're one of the people who dies from that kind of pill, if you die because you take the pill. Or in most cases, you have cancer, you get a cancer treatment, you find out if you're one of the people who it doesn't work for when it doesn't work for you. That will seem the equivalent of leeches in the future. That we're going to a phase where medicine will be personalized, where your sequenced genome will be the foundation of your electronic health record. And what that means is that everybody is going to be sequenced probably 5 days after conception, because we're going to move toward more and more of us conceiving through IVF and embryo selection rather than through sex, or at birth. And China in 2 years is planning to sequence half of all newborns, and it won't be long before all newborns, at least in China, and in some other places, are sequenced. So the number of people, the data set will increase massively. Our ability to use the big data analytics tools to understand even extremely complex systems, that is going to increase. So we're going to know more and more about what our genetics say. And that leads us to the question, well, how genetic are we? If we were 100% genetic, then environment wouldn't have any impact. And scientists trying to figure out which traits are more genetic and less often use twin studies. And what they've found, this is just a quick summary, is that in most cases, identical twins raised apart are more similar to each other than fraternal twins, non-identical twins, raised in the same room. And so different traits have different genetic components, but all in all, the collective of the twin studies suggest that humans are about 50% genetic. We're 50% nature and about 50% nurture. And so that means that we're going to have predictive capabilities for these early stage pre-implanted embryos for about 50% of future traits, including many disease states, but also traits that have a genetic underpinning. So what are those traits? I mean, the obvious ones are the physical appearance, height, but also IQ is highly genetic, personality style is highly genetic. All of these things that we now associate with the magic and imprecision of life, we are going to recognize as being more and more genetic. And so we're going to be able to use that information when making informed decisions about which of those early stage pre-implanted embryos to implant in the mother. So that's this first phase of these three revolutions. The second phase is right now, I talked about women undergoing IVF. and having their eggs extracted. It's actually a very painful and difficult process, but we're moving to having the capacity, we're very close to it actually, to being able to grow human eggs from any adult cells. And in this case, it will most likely be certain types of blood cells and skin cells. And so what this process, induced pluripotent stem cells, does is you take this adult cell, you induce it into being a stem cell, and then that stem cell into an egg progenitor cell, and that egg progenitor cell into an egg. And now, rather than having 10 or 15 or maybe 20 eggs extracted from the mother, you can have hundreds, you can have thousands. And then, because the sperm is much more easily accessible, you can fertilize 100, 200 of these female eggs created from induced stem cells. And now, rather than doing genetic analysis of 10 pre-implanted embryos, you can have 100, 200, 1,000. And then when you screen those, you can look for all of these kinds of traits. Which are the ones that have human outlier intelligence capabilities? Which are the ones likely to live longer and healthier lives? Which are the ones likely to have outgoing personalities? Really, whatever you are interested in, as long as it has a genetic foundation, you can screen for the genetic component of that trait or that disease state. And then, with these pre-implanted 5-day-old embryos, we can then conceivably, at least conceptually, mate early-stage embryos from one genetic line, from two parents, with an early-stage embryo from another genetic line. So a 5-day-old embryo could have a baby with another 5-day-old embryo. And then those babies could have babies with other 5-day-old embryos. And you could really go down the line. And this is right now just a thought experiment, but it shows what is going to be possible in the very near future. That when we think about how that process might play out, think about what our ancestors have done to the poor chicken over the last few thousand years. Find a chicken in the wild, it lays 1 egg a month. Domestic chickens lay 1 egg a day. And our ancestors, knowing nothing about genetics, pushed that change just through selective breeding. Imagine, with all of the knowledge that we are going to have, what kind of changes we would conceivably be able to push. And everything that I've talked about up to this point, these are all our quote-unquote natural children. I haven't mentioned, as you can tell, the word CRISPR yet. I haven't mentioned gene editing, because you don't need gene editing to do pretty much all of the things that I've said. This is just about supercharging selective breeding, which we've done for many years. But then on top of that, we are experiencing the most profound revolution in our ability to edit genes. We've been able to edit genes for at least decades using very basic methodologies of bombarding organisms or cells with radiation and then seeing what happens, and once in a while you get lucky and something interesting happens. But now with the advent of multiple gene editing technologies, including CRISPR, with a tremendous, greater than ever before, level of speed and low cost and precision, we can go in and edit genomes. And everybody is talking about CRISPR, but just as before CRISPR, there was zinc finger and talent and these other gene editing tools that seemed really cool at the time, and now they seem prehistoric compared to CRISPR. Very, very soon, CRISPR will be, oh, remember when all we had was CRISPR. CRISPR was so basic, doing all this crazy cutting, double-stranded cutting of the genome, because there are revolutions upon revolutions, and again, because the speed of change is speeding up so rapidly, that we're going to be able to go in to cells, including the cells of our early stage pre-implanted embryos, and make changes. On one hand, that can be very scary to people. On the other hand, if you have if two parents both are carriers of a certain disease, and their child, even if they have 100 embryos, all of those embryos are carriers of that same disease, and they can go in safely and make one small change to eliminate that disease forever. Would parents want that? Well, we're already seeing that they would, many would, in the case of mitochondrial transfer, where, which I won't go into, but where the UK Parliament has authorized clinical trials of making heritable genetic changes to pre-implanted embryos to eliminate that one disease. And if it's one disease, there will be more diseases. And so we can see that not just that we'll all start with these very simple decisions. And a lot of it will be based on, do I want to have a healthier child who will live a longer and healthier life? And everybody will answer yes. And nobody will ever be asked the question, do you want a super baby or not a super baby? The question will be, do you want to embrace this small marginal advance that will give your child a better chance of living a healthy life? And for most everybody, the answer to that question will be yes. And by these little steps that won't even seem like steps, we are going to move into this new world where healthcare applications are not the destination of the genetics revolution. They are just one station along the way. The ultimate destination of this revolution is the transformation of our evolutionary trajectory as a species. And we will keep going further and further because, for many reasons, but one is because we are a hubristic species. We are this species that has embraced every technology that has given us the opportunity to make incredible advances, but also, like every technology, has a downside, from the spear to the wheel to nuclear power, the Industrial Revolution. So we will, some of us will embrace this, and others may not. And the reason why we'll have this variable adoption is that we will all bring different cultural traditions to the mix. There are some societies that are very uncomfortable, for good reasons, with everything that I've described up to this point. There are some societies who believe that we are all God's creation and that God is like a watchmaker, and that this system that we have, whether it's through intelligence, God's intelligence design, or evolution, is that it's too dangerous to meddle with it. And we already see that with genetically modified crops. Even though there are decades of research, none of which has shown genetically modified crops are unsafe for human consumption, people just feel that something is unnatural about it for some very legitimate reasons. But there will be other societies that are already far more comfortable with this idea of engineering. And let's just say hypothetically that my country, the United States, decides to put very strong limitations first on embryo selection and then on embryo manipulation, which would be very logical. Germany, for its historical reasons, already is very restrictive on this type of embryo selection because of very real connections between the idea of embryo selection based on whatever concept of genetic desirability and the history of eugenics and Nazism. And as the child of a refugee from Nazism myself, I'm very aware of these issues. But there will be other societies, and China is a case in point today, where these technologies will be massively embraced and seen as a pathway to having a healthier population, a more competitive population. And given these differences, these cultural differences, and given the inherent competitiveness of human beings within and between societies, it is absolutely inevitable that these technologies will be embraced at various levels by different societies. And some human societies will race forward, and others will be more cautious. But the ones who are more cautious will be under a lot of pressure. Because if it's true, if a society can become healthier and more competitive with higher IQ people, it's going to be very difficult for others to say, hey, we're opting out for ideological or philosophical reasons. But this debate is going to become the fundamental debate of our generation and of our time. That unlike never before, ever before, we have the ability to evolve ourselves. And there will be huge issues of equity, who has access to these technologies, diversity, that diversity isn't just a great value. It's our sole survival strategy as a species. And if we engineer ourselves in a way that limits our diversity based on the world that we see now, who knows what our genetic fitness may be if the world should change. And what do we do with all of our ancient and wonderful moral systems that have helped guide us, some of which are helpful and some of which may not be helpful going forward? And I always say that these technologies are new, but the values that we need to use to deploy, to use them wisely, are very, very old. And so how do we draw from our history, the kind of history that this country represents, to make wise decisions going forward? And that really is this fundamental question, because this wave of the intersection of the genetics and AI revolutions is going to be transforming our species far sooner than most people understand. And we collectively, as a species, are not ready for it. And so one of the things that I have been doing is calling for a species-wide education effort and a species-wide dialogue on the future of human genetic engineering. Because if fundamental decisions are made about the future of our species, and the general public doesn't feel that they've been engaged, or at least invited to the discussion, we'll have the same kind of chaos and confrontation as we have in the genetically modified crops debate. But we also need to think about, with this technology coming, exactly what Armin and the rest of you are going to be thinking about here, is how do we benefit from that? How do we guide that process, both on the scientific front, but also on the values front? This isn't just about technology. None of these technologies are just about technology. And if we think that we're just having a technology conversation, we're going to get ourselves in a lot of trouble. This is about technology and the values that will be used to guide that technology. And so for me, being here in Armenia, a country that's been driven by its values for so long, that's been knocked down so many times, and the people who've been knocked down so many times, but who've kept going and kept the faith that a moral path can be found, even though it may be the hardest path. This is the place where we need to be having this kind of conversation. And this place, with its incredible foundation in the basic sciences, also has the potential to lead on the scientific front as well. So I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you to all of you. Are we doing questions, or am I done? What's that?
Thank you, Mr. Metzel.
Thank you so much.
We have some time for questions. I'm sure there are many questions about this interesting topic, so if someone has a question, please just raise your hand and you will get the mic. Thank you.
So we do have questions. Will people just raise their hand? Yeah.
Fascinating and very thought-provoking.
Thank you.
I do have to say, so my lab designs products. And right now we design products, we make mistakes.
Yes.
And that's the part of nature, it makes mistakes. And the way how it progresses, it makes mistakes.
Yeah.
By selecting embryos that are perfect, you're potentially biasing the evolution in a way that we have no idea how it will impact the outcomes. And that's the one thing. The second thing is, none of the genes, I mean, the era of one gene, one disease is gone. Most of the diseases are multifactorial. And typically a gene would have a positive impact on one case and negative on another. Example is diabetes and Alzheimer's disease.
Yeah. Or sickle cell and malaria. Yeah.
Exactly. Or there are genes that makes us more susceptible to pain and depression, yet these genes makes us smarter. Yes. So how would you decide?
Yes. Yeah, it's a fantastic fundamental question. And certainly this issue of genetic diversity is key, because we understand so little of how our biology works that when you imagine making choices, not just are there trade-offs that we understand, there's lots of trade-offs that we don't understand. And that's why I think embryo selection, and people talk about CRISPR and gene editing as the forefront of this revolution. I actually don't think that. I think embryo selection will be at the lead, and so we're going to be able to just make predictive guesses of what embryos will have what outcomes. And they'll be highly imperfect. But because all of them will be based on some level of knowledge, they will always, at least in the relatively near future, seem better than just the complete randomness of nature. And so you're absolutely right that some of these single gene mutation diseases can be protective in other contexts. And even the things that we identify as single gene mutation diseases, we don't know what else is happening. We just see the correlation of this single mutation. And so that's why I think embryo selection will be, that's what's going to be at the forefront of all of this. But when we get to these to gene editing, then it's going to be, we'll just go up this ladder of complexity. So in the beginning, there are single gene mutation diseases that we can say if we know somebody is going to have Huntington's disease or one of these single gene mutation diseases where we know, or Tay-Sachs, where we think it's very likely that they're going to die a painful early death, that's going to be, okay, we can make that change. And getting to the understanding of the whole, that's where this intersection of the genomics and the AI revolutions is going to be so important. So we have a long, long way to go. Now, we can't be heuristic, but we are heuristic. And so we're going to start, as with all of these technologies, we're going to start deploying them before we have the full knowledge of how to most wisely deploy them. But you're absolutely right. And the more aggressive we become in making changes, the greater the dangers are going to be, that there will be unintended consequences. And when there are unintended consequences and human life is involved, that's obviously a very big deal. Yeah?